welcome to this afternoon lunch panel. Now, almost every panel I'm on it right now, I could basically start the same way. So technology is going fast. Generative AI made it even faster. Stuff is changing. Now, often the debate when it comes to workforce is also about like, are jobs going to go away? But I think almost equally important is like, you know, what about skills? What is the change? How does the workforce actually change? And on a very personal level, you know, what do I need to know, learn, master in this new age of AI? And that's kind of the question we want to tackle this over lunch here. You know, as I have two teenagers who are thinking about college, now it becomes very critical to think about, you know, what jobs, skills are going to be relevant in 5-10 years. Maybe they're going to be gone. Maybe you have to pick the right thing. As a professor here at the business school, we have to think about what should we teach you? What are the skills that are necessary in this new age? There was a quote which I think is interesting that Tom Friedman once said, you know, it says, today's worker need to approach the workplace like somebody who's training for the Olympics but doesn't know what discipline he's competing in or she is competing in. So in this panel, I want to discuss, you know, how do we train if we don't know what discipline we're competing in? And what impact does technology and AI have on leaders and the workforce in general? Now, to speed the discussion up a little bit, in almost a lot of those discussions, one answer is always, well, the human skills, but we want to know, what does that mean? I mean, we all know that like one answer could be, well, we need to foster the movement, but what are those human skills going forward? So I have an amazing panel here today to help me kind of answer those questions. Let me quickly introduce all the three panelists. Angela, unfortunately, had an emergency, so she's on Zoom. But let's start to my left here with Tania Babina. She is an assistant professor here at the business school in the finance department and does a lot of work on, you know, innovation, entrepreneurship, and technological change. In particular, also, what does AI, how does it affect workplaces? How does it affect the skills that workers need in those workplaces? So it's empirical work that we're going to come back to. Then there is Angela Jung. She's a consultant in technology and cybersecurity at Russell Reynolds Associates, one of the leading executive search firms. So she specializes in recruiting transformational technological executives for global Fortune 500, private equity, venture capital, and growth stage firms. She's based in Miami and New York, and is really a leader, is the leader in their global cybersecurity team and a member of the technology practice. She has an MBA from Columbia Business School in 2020, and I think the most important part of her vita is that she took strategy with me when she was a student here, which was, I'm sure, was transformational. I'm not sure whether it was good or bad, but it was, hopefully left an impact. And then last but not least, there's Jeff Schwartz. So he's an adjunct professor here. I'm actually teaching together with him everything I do with Future of Work here. He's also vice president of Insight and Impact at Gloat. This is a startup firm who does like internal marketplaces, so thinks about skills within the firm. But prior to that, you know, he was a principal at Deloitte for 20 years. Most recently, he was the US leader for the Future of Work practice and the senior partner in the global human capital practice in Deloitte. So let me start with Tania. So your empirically looked at how skills and also the organizational structure changed. Is that working? Changed when in the age of AI. Can you tell us a little bit what you found, and also how do you interpret those changes in required skills and the org structure that you found?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me? Yeah? Not so well? Okay, awesome. So I want to preface by just defining what AI means, and I'm going to use a standard industry definition. Industry thinks about AI in terms of three interrelated key technologies: machine learning, natural language processing, and computer vision. How are they different from what we had before? I mean, in essence, it's a continuation of business analytics trend. But these technologies, what they do, they are able to take a lot of data, structured, but most importantly, unstructured, like text, images, and make much better predictions, right? So it's a prediction technology, and where predictions are useful in business, well, we have uncertainty, which is almost everywhere, right? So I just want to fix definition what we mean. We're not talking about robots, we're talking about prediction technologies. Now, in terms of what did we expect, what do economists say these technologies are going to do, I don't know, like 5 years ago? What economists, essentially, they thought more about this technology as an automation, like robotic type of technology, and they predicted that it's going to kill all of our jobs, and we're going to be all jobless, and specifically high-skilled labor, your type of jobs, right? Before, technologies were mostly replacing low-skill, routine jobs, think factory worker doing the same thing over and over again. This technology, economists predicted, is going to take away a lot of high-skilled jobs where you need to have a decision-making process, right? Where you face uncertainty, you want to make good decisions facing that uncertainty. I just want to preface that. What happened so far? This is where my research comes in. It turns out that firms so far have used AI to solve all kinds of business problems. So these technologies can be useful to solve many problems, but one common application across all firms and technologies that we document in our work, it's actually for product innovation. Let me give you examples. Self-driving cars, recent generation, they all have computer vision built in them, right? It stops before you hit something if you are not paying attention, or self-driving cars down the road. COVID-19 vaccine by Moderna was designed through their AI factory. You might remember when COVID started, people said it's going to take us years to design vaccine. But these new technologies that allow to shorten this product development or vaccine development, drug development process, speed up this process. So there are many applications where AI essentially is being built into products and services of companies. We also find, and this is going to lead me to answer your question, in that paper that firms and industries that invested more in AI over the past 10 years have actually seen growing employment. Remember, economists predicted all job skill, we actually find employment is increasing. And then we dived into what kind of jobs and who is being hired and who is being not hired. We find that most of the new jobs in these firms that invested in AI and industries as well tend to be actually high-skilled, highly educated workers that help firms in this product development and management of their whole production cycle of product innovation and sales and marketing. So we actually find the opposite of what economists predicted, suggesting that these technologies so far have been complementary to the jobs that all you are going to have. Now, we also found that in terms of thinking, in terms of hierarchical structure, do we have more senior management, very senior management versus a little bit less of an entry-type jobs? We find that it's mostly highly educated workers that come in at a lower jobs. How we interpret this is that when this new technology arrives, right, firms did not know how to use them, they figured out eventually, and they need people with skills complementary to this technology, right? And that's exactly what we find in the paper. Firms start hiring a ton of recent grads from IT degrees, mostly technical degrees, to help them kind of build out this new capabilities in terms of developing AI internally and then developing the whole product cycle from the development to sales.
Interesting. And so the organizational structure becomes flatter or less hierarchical as well?
Yeah, so it's, you think, as in terms of hierarchical structure, right? we see that since there's new workers tend to be recent grads, they mostly take lower level positions, right? So the organizations become flatter.
Interesting. Thank you. So let me move on to Jeff, given that. So, you studied the future of work for decades, I think, and consulted the biggest players in every industry. So what would you say to somebody, also knowing now how somebody who is one of the students, what skills are necessary to succeed in this new world?
So I love this question. I know a few minutes ago you were talking about what advice we would give to people finishing high school or starting college. I'm at a slightly different point in my life. I have a 3-month-old granddaughter and a 2-week-old grandnephew. My brother just had a grandson. And it's a very interesting question. By the way, for anybody who's at Columbia Business School, certainly if you're a graduate and an alumnus, what is it going to be like to actually educate and train people who are being born now in the age of GPT-4? I'll ask Tania to tell me what version of GPT will be on in 15 years, because part of what we're talking about is how are we hitting a moving target? What does it mean to educate and build skills for GPT-7, GPT-8, that sort of thing? But one way, there's many ways to think about this. In the coursework that Stephan, you and I do, one of the key things that we talk about is how do you frame the question? Sometimes we talk about human skills as if they are separate from our ability to work with technology. So I'll just give 3 or 4 very quick examples. This is from a World Economic Forum study, and it literally asks the question, what's the difference between the skills that the workforce needs in 2025 and the skills that the workforce needed in 2015? They actually compared what was required. No surprise, the #1 skill is problem solving and analytical thinking and innovation. I think that builds, Tania, on what you were saying. #3 is creativity, originality, and initiative. Again, not a surprise. But here are, and again, shortly after that is working with people, leadership, and social influence. But there were 2 categories of skills that, to me, were particularly interesting. There were 2 sets of skills that related to a category that they call self-management. There's a category around active learning and learning strategies. Think about this in terms of how do we make the meta skill of learning a new skill, right? Learning itself becoming a skill. And then they have another self-management skill, which they call self-management around resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility. I think we can all relate to this idea that we are living in a time where it is very stressful and we're going through constant change, and we'll come back to this. So we have 2 skills in 2025 that we weren't even thinking about in 2015. Self-management, learning as a meta skill, and dealing with uncertainty and stress also as a skill. And then there were 2 other skills, and the reason I find this particularly interesting is we tend to talk about human skills or soft skills or power skills on one side and technical skills on the other. And we're getting to a point where the intersection of human and technical skills are themselves critical skills for the future. And again, the way the World Economic Forum lists this, and again, the first one they list on this list of 10 is technology use. But how do we use technology, how do we monitor technology, and how do we control technology, right? How do we work with technology? And we'll come back to this. How do we put technology on the team? It's not about putting humans in the loop, as Tom Malone at MIT says. It's about putting computers in the group. Or really, it's how do we put technology and people on the same team? And then after we have this sort of technology use in terms of monitoring and control, then they list technology use in terms of design and programming, right? And so again, to me, I just want to highlight the difference. Self-management, learning as a skill, resilience as a skill, and if you looked at the 2024 LinkedIn skills that they just published in February, the top skill that they listed was adaptability, which I think relates to this as well.
Cool. Thank you, Jeff. So let me go to Angela now. You observe on the front line what skills are important for executives right now. Now, Angela, you worked 10 years in executive search. So what changed in this decade, and what does it need today to be a successful leader?
Yeah, so in the executive search world, particularly my firm at Russell Reynolds Associates, we specialize at the C-level recruiting space. So any CEO, chief, fill in the blank officer, all the way up to the board of directors. What we've been finding is that change management is really front and center as far as the critical and mandatory leadership skills. So, Jeff, you touched on a lot of these points, but one of the biggest things is definitely that growth mindset and that digital mindset. So what that means is the willingness and the attitude and the right behaviors towards innovating, taking more calculated risks, learning about next-gen capabilities. And then next, there's the need to be decisive and the need to commit and be a fast mover. Otherwise, you're just going to be obsolete. Everyone is asking the question around generative AI and its capabilities. So if you're still reluctant, you're going to become obsolete and fall behind the times. There's also a saying or a phrase called the 30% rule. So even if you're not a chief information officer, chief technology officer, chief AI officer, the 30% rule, it kind of says that every employee, especially at the leadership level, they require a foundational level of understanding around AI and digital and next-gen technologies. So you don't need to be a master and hands-on keyboard technologist, but you do have to be a bit more digitally aware and savvy. Again, Jeff touched on this a bunch, but that change agency and the ability to influence, create that culture of innovation and collaboration too, because what we've been finding is it's not just solely left up to the chief technology officer to drive this digital adoption around AI, but it has to be a collective effort and a system-wide effort too, internally and agile across the leadership teams down to the employees, and also externally too, as far as industry advisors, co-innovators, co-collaborators. So the change agency and the leadership and influencing ability is key. Other big important point that we've been finding is around, the healthy dose of skepticism and the ability to ask the right smart questions. It's okay to not know the ones and zeros of AI and technology, but being smart around, well, how does this apply to our business, to our customers? And also, are we asking the right questions? Are we maybe leaning on a biased set of data, so it's actually a bit biased and discriminatory in terms of the suggestions and the recommendations that generative AI is proposing. The other thing too is threats, competitors, adversaries, they're also getting smarter as well. So from a competitor differentiation standpoint, you also have to ask what is the competitor, or what is the competitive landscape looking at? And also, what are the bad actors and the adversaries doing to expose our vulnerability? So the risk awareness has to be really key here. Secondly, eye for talent. So again, do we have the right technical skill sets at all levels of the organization? If it doesn't make sense to hire internally, then where can we foster more partnerships and industry collaboration? And then finally, integrity is a huge one, because in this nascent space where people are still figuring things out, we have to ask smart questions around, are we leading with empathy? Whether it's low scale or high skill employees that are concerned and afraid about losing their job, and we have to still trust that there's opportunity still ahead, even though the organization and the industry is changing. Not all jobs are going to be replaced by automation, so you have to instill trust in the workforce to maintain that healthy workforce, and we have to put the right guardrails around the ethical use of these technologies and AI. So those are the biggest things that we're seeing in the executive level.
Thank you, Angela. Now, let me be a little provocative here. So first of all, you're saying they need to know more technical skills, social skills. and all of it, more of it. So they just need to know more. And the second is, if I would have had a panel like that 20 years ago, and would have had, what do good leaders need to know? They would say, well, we need some technical, like some technical skills, some social skills. So what is really different today? And how is that shift? How do students like today figure out how much do I need to know, whatever, Python or like now AI or whatever? How much do I need to learn how to lead or how to work in teams? So maybe a question to all three of you, and maybe whoever wants to go first, think about how to, do they just need to know more? We just need to know more? And what is different today than like 20, 30 years ago? Well, good leaders always had some content knowledge and some interpersonal leadership skills.
I'm happy to go first, and then Tania and Angela can add to it or correct me on a perspective. I think there are a few things that are different. There is more that we need to know today than we ever did before. Part of this is because there's a concept that we often talk about, which is the half-life of a skill. How long is a skill useful when you learn a particular knowledge around it? And many people have looked at this. JSB, John Seeley Brown, has looked at it. And we know, or at least I would say we've observed, that the half-life of technical skills, specific skills, are getting shorter. It may have been 10 years, 5 years. I was on a panel with Joe Fuller from Harvard a couple of weeks ago, who said we may be getting to the point where the half-life of a technical skill is roughly equal to how long it takes an individual and a team and a company to acquire and be proficient at that skill. So it raises questions about what is mastery and how long we can be the master of a subject. So some people hear that and say, so, okay, Jeff, we're supposed to become generalists and jacks of all trades. I actually don't think that that's the direction. And Linda Grattan at London Business School said about 10 years ago that one way to think about this is that we need to be serial masters, right? We need to be masters of many skills and many technical domains during our lives, and that's a different way of looking at it. But there are two other things that I think to think about. One is that work looks increasingly less like an assembly line and more like a series of projects and problems that we're solving, right? And if something looks like an assembly line, it could be a physical assembly line, it could be the assembly line of processing mortgages, which also looks like an assembly line. Anything that looks like an assembly line, big parts of that work are going to be in some way automated. When work is projectized, there's a different dynamic to what we're trying to do. How do we create, and so the shift is that work is projectized, work is becoming more team-based, teams are becoming the focus, so we're looking at the skills and the capabilities of the team. How we work on teams become important. And another thing that's different is that increasingly, companies and organizations are managing workforces that are much broader than the people and employees that work for them as well. We call this workforce ecosystems. I wrote a book on this with some colleagues from MIT and Deloitte. And then we're moving from a sort of control and supervisory skill base, if you will, for leaders, to much more of an influence and a team orchestration role. So I think there are some major shifts going on. And the last comment I'll make, and Angela mentioned the growth mindset, there was a book written 26 years ago called The War for Talent. Great book, written by great colleagues at McKinsey. But the war for talent, from one perspective, is a fixed mindset view of talent. That there's a fixed amount of talent out there, and we need to compete for it. Today, leaders and managers are in a world where we're not competing for a fixed amount of talent, because much of the talent we need doesn't exist yet. The war is to grow talent. Right? So we are literally moving to a growth mindset for everything we do. It's not an allocation problem, it's a growth problem. And I think that's a different perspective for leaders and managers.
Yeah, I can go for a second. I study innovation more generally, and I'm a student of history, and I feel like history teaches us a lot You know, people say history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, right? If you look back over the past 100 years, as I did, thinking about technology, what are the new technology that emerged and how they changed the work environment? You know, one of the greatest 100 years ago, there were three, right? Electricity, automotive, and I'm forgetting the third one, but there was a big change. You see it in innovation 1920s being exponential. I think now, 100 years later, we are in a similar position where we have many different types of technologies starting to emerge. AI is just one of them. But quantum computing, there are already use cases, which is going to revolutionize how we compute things. Many other things, storage, right? Batteries. What Tesla managed to do is just amazing over the past 15 years. So a lot of these technologies that are all emerging at the same time. So I think that's what a little bit different from maybe past 20 years, where we're on a verge of several technologies emerging and complementing each other, right? Because AI is not useful without compute, it's not useful without storage, and it's not useful without people who implement it. That's why the technical understanding or what did this technology help us to do? And I think this is where the business acumen, the ability, as Jim pointed out, the ability to understand what problems you are solving and which tools are helpful for solving these problems are always going to be helpful. And hopefully in business school, you will continue gaining these skills. But I do think it's quite important to understand which technologies which help solve different skills, right? When I talk to computer scientists who actually work for companies, they say we are useless without domain area expertise. People who actually understand the industry and what are the biggest problems and what are the tools being used. So I'm much more optimistic about business school education. Problem solving is where the growth opportunities are. What are the biggest problems? What are the appropriate tools to use? But for that, I agree. You don't need to be doing PhD in machine learning to be able to implement these algorithms as a manager. You just need to understand where they're useful and where they're not useful.
Thank you. Angela?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Tania and Jeff has shared. So the other thing too is it depends on what level of the organization you're looking at. The more junior levels or within the technology and development organizations probably need to be a little bit more technical than the rest of your enterprise colleagues. But holistically, especially at the leadership levels as an executive, you have to look at the whole fabric of where are the skills, where are we trying to go? What skills are we missing? Can we train from within through certification, or do we need to bring in the right external talent? Do we need to bring a chief data and AI officer? So you kind of have to look at the organization as a whole and take an inventory of what exists internally and what needs to be brought in from the outside. And the whole war for talent, it is a dynamic and evolving space, especially with this new digital age. So with the skill sets that are in high demand, yes, you're always going to need a specific technology expert, whether it's developing or modernizing the infrastructure that supports the systems across the business, whether it's the person that's responsible for the data, storage, hygiene, and then converting that to actionable intelligence and analytics, or whether it is the more business savvy technologist or digital leader, right, that can kind of tie it all together. But it has to be done in unison. It can't be looked at in silos or really specified to what one specific skill or technical learning that you should apply. The answer is kind of depends, which I know is a consultant answer, but really does depend where you're looking in the organization and how that applies to your business.
Cool. Thank you. So I want to afterwards quickly talk about leadership, but before I want to ask you a question about careers. So they're all embarking on a career now. Now, if you pick a job, if you picked a job 30, 40 years ago, you went like, this is a great company, this is a great industry, I'm making a career there. Now, if those skills are changing, the careers, the first job, the second job, the third job, the fourth, is going to be different. They have options. How would you advise to choose between those different options that are different than they were like 40, 30, maybe 15 years ago?
Do you want to start? You want me to start?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I actually asked this question to our class at Columbia last night. And the question I asked was, when you were thinking about your job or your role or your next adventure when you leave CBS, we had sort of 5 or 6 items on the list, and how would you rank them? And one of them was the company you work for, one of them was the compensation you receive, one of them was corporate values. The number one item that the class listed when they ranked them was a company that provides, a position that provides growth and development opportunity, right? Which makes, of course, sense in the context of what we're talking about today. And then what we talked about is, how do you know that the company, the organization that you're going to, is a good place to grow and develop opportunity? So there are indices. There's the Opportunity Index that was developed that looks at this. But it raises some very interesting questions, because the way that I think you get that data is you can go to places like Glassdoor and others. But what people are really looking for is this an organization where I can actually grow? And not only go vertically growth, but explore things and have different options. So I think that's a sort of top of the list. The other is, I'm just reflecting on some of the language that we're using. We know that the world is not about silos. We know that the world it's not mechanistic anymore. For many, many decades, we talked about companies and organizations as if a mechanistic model applied to them, right? They are much more organic, right? And the whole notion of growth, and I'll sort of end with this observation, Stephan. From age 0 to age 20, right, we are growth beings, right? Every year we are almost a different person, right? When you look at an infant and a toddler and a young child, we are built for growth. And then at a certain point, we ask the question to this 20-year-old, what do you want to do? What's the linear path that you want to get on, right? Maybe we're not even structuring the whole question correctly, right? And so is it about change? And I'll sort of end with this observation. When we talk about the future and all the things that are happening, we sort of recoil when we think about the amount of change that's going on, right? One way to ask the question is this about change or is this about growth, right? And if you are thinking about your life in the next 30 or 40 years, how can you sequence the work that you do, the volunteering that you do, your personal life, so that it's organized around a growth trajectory and a plan that you're thinking about? It's not about a ladder. It's not about a linear plan. This is a big shift that we are in the middle of right now.
You want to go for next, or should I? Angela, maybe I can ask you. So what do you observe, kind of how careers of those top executives change that could inform like somebody who just starts the career and say like, that's probably a very successful path forward in this quote unquote new environment?
Mm-hmm. So an old mentor of mine, when I first started out in the search business, shared a framework called the 5 Ps, and touches a lot on what Jeff has shared around what motivates an individual to pursue different opportunities. So the 5 Ps are: 1, pay. That's an obvious one. The position itself, the people and the culture, the platform, so the company and the organization you're moving into, and then place, physical geography. Generally, throughout someone's different phases of their career, maybe 2 or 3 will spike a little bit higher in weighting compared to the others, and it'll shift and it'll be dynamic over time based on different changes in your life, family obligations, or personal ambitions. So it's very dynamic, and that'll evolve over time. But as individuals are considering what is the right opportunity ahead of me at this point in time of my career, and how does it catapult me into that next phase of continued success and growth and development as I continue on as an executive leader, those 5 Ps are probably a good start to start evaluating, okay, what are the most important things for me at this given time? And does the opportunity in front of me, or maybe 2 or 3 opportunities ahead of me, which ones align best with where I'm prioritizing around my needs at that given time? And then just in general, especially at the executive level, again, everyone's talking about AI, everyone's talking about the next disruptive technical expert, or adding more diverse leadership to the team. The biggest thing around the organization, particularly the culture, that from the candidate's perspective, they're asking us as recruiters, or asking the companies that are doing the hiring, are, well, how is the organization set up? And is it set up in the right way where I'm set up for success in my role? Because the organization, the company just may not be ready structurally, culturally, to be ready for that disruption or change. There has to be a little bit of a crawl, walk, run evolution, because what we focus on is trying to mitigate the amount of risk of an organ rejection, right? So different maturity levels of an organization and the level of disruption that an executive brings, there has to be a little bit of a coordinated dance there. But I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. So Tania, and then we're going to go to Q&A, but
Yeah, one thing I just want to abstract a little bit from all the AI hype, right? When we start this research in 2019, people would look at us as if we're like crazy or stupid to look into AI. I mean, we were convinced it was very useful technology. It's been used by firms. So I just want to abstract a little bit from the current hype about it. It's going to be useful, but it's not going to be a panacea for everything. And I want to revert to the first principles, which is who is going to be always useful and rewarded in their career. So somebody who can solve big problems, right? Whether you are doing this for big organization or you are starting your own companies, as I know some of you will. I have my students here, some of them, who go on and start amazing companies. So trying to find the biggest problems for society, more generally, for companies you work with, or maybe for your own, is where the opportunities will always be. And for that, I think what's really important, this goes back to what Jeff said at the very beginning, self-learning and ability to learn more and more about what's happened in terms of technologies, and Angela brought it as well, which is understanding different tools that can be used to solve big problems is always going to be valuable, no matter what you do.
I'd like to add 2 just quick ideas to this, because the whole question of what does a 21st century career look like is a really interesting question. So one piece of data and one observation. Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott wrote a book about 7, 8 years ago titled The 100-Year Life. This is about demography. We know that lives in the 21st century are roughly twice as long as they were at the beginning of the 20th century. It's 2024. If you're 24 years old now, and you live to be 100, you're going to be alive in the year 2100, right? And so part of what we're talking about is what does it mean to plan for careers either as a business leader or a public sector leader or as an individual, where if you live to be 100, God willing, you may have a career where you're working for 50 or 60 years. And I'm going to add a P to Angela's list, and maybe this was on the list. Our careers are portfolios. Our careers are portfolios. They are not ladders. They are not linear progressions, right? And they are portfolios of ongoing reinvention, right? And part of the opportunity, not the risk, not the challenge, is what does it mean to have a career that is a portfolio where we all should expect to do many different things during our lives. And that is simply a shift from the way that we almost always talk about careers. Again, I'll end with this question. We ask people 14, 15 years old, 12 years old, 18 years old, what do you want to do in your life? As if there were one thing that you were going to do. And maybe the question is, what 3 or 4 dozen things would you like to do in your life? And then how do you develop the skills and the capabilities and the mindsets to do that?
Great, thank you. So let's open it up. So there are mics on both sides. So maybe there, Julie. Yeah.
Hi there. Thank you all for your time. I had a question that centers around creative destruction and how you guys are talking a lot about the youth and people of our age that are going into the workforce. But I'm really interested every time technology comes into society, it usually ends up helping society as a whole, but there's that lag period where there's maybe a 10, 15-year generation of people who need to acquire skills. And if you look at 19th century Europe, you have the Luddites. So how do you acclimate the new generation or the 30-plus-year-olds in the industry that are starting to automate? And so my question is, do companies need to start taking a more nurturing point of view? For example, Amazon teaching their employees how to code or creating programs for that, or boot camps that allow for that malleability in skill set instead of asking the employees only to develop those skills.
Yeah, I'm happy to start.
I'm interested because you mentioned earlier that you looked at this over a 100-year historical period. So I'm hoping to hear a little bit about what we've learned about this in the last century.
I completely agree that, I feel like sometimes economists focus on the negative aspects of technological change. But like you said, technology made our lives so much better. Think how people worked 100 years ago. They worked for 10 hours in awful conditions. They didn't have much luxuries that we have today that makes our lives better. So I completely agree with you that on net, technologies make our and society better. Now, going back to your question, the speed of innovation is increasing. We need to adapt to that and understand what's happening. Who should pay for that? Typically, who are the usual suspects? The employers, the government, or you? And I would argue that you, going back to self-learning aspect that Jeff brought up, is who end up investing in yourself and ability to learn how to use this technology. Why is that? Well, a classic economic issue with companies training their employees is that they cannot necessarily get rewarded from training you, because you can get trained and another company is going to poach you and pay you higher salary for your new acquired skills. So when I talk to economists who actually do cutting-edge research and try to understand whether companies in the US do a lot of retraining, the answer is disappointingly and depressingly no. Should it be the government who invests in training programs? Well, in theory, that sounds great, right? Because governments are there to internalize externalities. But the issue is most governments are not that great at this. So that leaves you in terms of self-learning, understand how to use these technologies. And I have plenty amazing examples. I study AI, and some of my students now ML engineers, and I talked to them. I was like, how did you become ML engineer? Well, they were just doing some other engineering, and then they saw an opportunity, and they're smart people, like all of you, and they self-learned how to use these technologies and whether useful they are not. So I think at the end of the day, it's about self-learning, going back to Jeff's point. I think it's the most important part.
I don't know, Angela may have a comment. What I'll add to it, I mean, you asked like 3 questions in one, by the way. So we could talk about creative destruction, the rate of technology, but I'll pick one thread of the question, which has to do, for me, thinking about what does it mean to have a career and live a long life? What does it mean to, for an individual or for an organization, to manage an employee in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, right? And I think, I totally agree. I think the individual is going to bear the most responsibility for this because government simply is going to lag on it. There are governments that are making progress on it. There are some models in Scandinavia and Germany where I think there's some better approaches to this. I think companies are beginning to recognize that making a broad set of learning and skill development programs available, often where the employee has to take her time or his time or their time to do it, is important. But I think the other thing that we're seeing is, I would not count out the workforce that you have that are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. Right? I don't think the future of work and the workforce is about recruiting and skilling people only in their 20s and their early 30s. And I think we're just beginning to think about what does it mean to really help people reskill and upskill throughout their lives.
Yeah, I would agree with both Tanya and Jeff. With regards to reskilling, especially the further up in the organization you go, I mean, it probably doesn't make sense for the organization to expect the, chief executive officer to take a Python class, right, or a coding class. But at the same time, that individual appetite and learning ability and the growth mindset, that is going to be key to be a successful digital leader when you're expected to lead a more increasingly diverse and dynamic digital workforce, right? So there has to be an internal motivating driver for any executive to better understand the digital world that we live in and the different technology skill sets that would exist within your domain and your remit. At the same time, the senior up you go in the organization, the less technically deep you need to be, but you need to be broad enough and well-versed enough in terms of within your sphere of influence, what are those disruptive capabilities or emerging talent skills that you need to bring into the organization. And what I brought up earlier around, collaborating externally and building an ecosystem of the right partners around you. I mean, for several clients, rather than a traditional board of directors, with fiscal responsibility and risk oversight, we're also seeing more increased demand for a digital board of advisors. So more geared around technical experts that can guide the strategic pivot of an organization from a legacy established enterprise into one that's more prepared to embrace digital technologies. So.
Thank you. Question? Other question?
Is it working out? Okay, perfect. Hi there. Thank you so much for coming. And I think my question relates to one of your comments around like how our average lifespan is increasing and we're likely to live up to or even more than 100 years, and that implies actually having longer careers. That is not necessarily a prospect that makes me super happy, and especially in thinking of AI as having this power of automation and being complementary. So my question for you is, do you see this complemental aspect of AI as being something that could potentially be deployed to reduce the amount of work that humans need to do in the current length of the week work journey, and how would be the potential implications of that in like the long term?
You want to start?
I'm happy to start. So far, AI tools have been complementary to workers. Some firms tried to replace workers with AI, and they cannot. Why? Because a job is typically a bundle of different things you do, right? And most of these things you do are not necessarily, cannot be resolved by AI, right? Writing, ChatGPT, whatever. That's useful to help with those skills. But a lot of other things you do, meetings, strategizing, all kinds of things, are not necessarily even replaceable by AI, right? So I just want to start with that. So far, what we've seen in my own work, AI has been complementary. And let me give you one of the examples that hopefully is going to be easy to relate to. About 5 years ago, when like the whole economist, society started to think about economics of AI, economists never agree on anything, okay? Never. But they agreed on one thing at that time, that it's going to be HR that is going to be decimated by AI tools. Okay, 5 years later, what do we see? No, it was not decimated. And I talked to HR professionals, and I tried to understand, or VCs who invest in HR, powering tools, what has been happening? Well, what has been happening is a lot of these ML tools replaced very tedious, monotonous type of works, looking into resumes, all types of things like this. And instead, it freed up time for much higher order tasks, like thinking about how can I make you happy so I retain you and benefit from your talent? How can we build teams together so people work well together and feel good about being part of the organization? So another, you can see I'm more of an optimist, right, on AI. And the final thing I want to say is that AI is going to do what we allow it to do. We have agency. And for issues where there are externalities, there are governments to solve those issues. Mm-hmm. We can go into the weeds of should we regulate AI, should we not, but I just want to say at a very high level that we control what's going to happen with AI impact on society more generally.
No, I think that's very powerful, and I think it's a question, I like the way you put it. Sometimes we ask the question, what are the trends we're seeing with the impact that AI will have on work? And I think, Tania, what you're highlighting is, yes, it's interesting to know what the trends are. It's actually maybe more interesting to think about what we want to do with AI and how we want to use it in our lives and in our work. And that sort of, I'll come back to a question, Stephan, you asked a few minutes ago. That comes back to this leadership and management question. Because one of the, and we haven't mentioned it just to be explicit about it, one of the really interesting domains of leadership and management today and the next few years more than ever is we are in a design phase of the future. We are designing and redesigning work and the way that it's done. When we say that work is projectized and not only process, it leads us to think about what does it mean to be a designer? What does it mean to have teams that are redesigning and designing the work that we're doing where people and technology are working together? It's less about supervision, it's less about control, it's less about monitoring. Of course, we're going to do all those things, but how do we get into a design mindset when we're thinking about how people and AI work together?
Thank you, Angela. If it's okay, let's move to the last question. And so, yeah, go ahead.
All right.
Yeah,
so,
I actually have to jump in 2 minutes, but,
okay.
But yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So I read a job description today that required 10 years of experience in large language models. So, of course, not possible. And it's a symptom that companies want to catch up with all of this hype of AI, and they basically don't know what they want. And what we discussed today, that this half-life of technical skills is only going to get worse. How can HR departments catch up on this new trend, or how can they adapt to this new way of hiring that maybe people need to be malleable and they basically don't have this technical skill, but they can adapt to it?
You want to let Angela start on this before she goes?
Yeah, Angela, maybe you can kick us off.
Absolutely. Yeah, we grapple with this all the time. So even when I started at the firm 9 years ago, I remember seeing something similar around, we want 20 years of cloud architecture experience, and I was like, okay, I don't think that exists, but especially with technical experiences or technical depth and skill sets, especially in a time where, again, Jeff said it's in the design phase. We're still in the very early stages of this actually taking full swing, where there's a track record and there is substantial operational implementation expertise. So to work with your HR partners, your hiring managers, I mean, that's what we deal with all the time when we try to educate and just demonstrate this is the landscape. This is the stage of maturity that we're at right now in the industry. And by the way, this is the available talent that exists at this point in time. These are probably the learnable skills. These are the skills that just don't exist yet. And these are the trade-offs. So what trade-offs are you willing to make, and how do we prioritize the right skill sets at this moment in time that can set you right for the next stage of your organization's journey? So it has to be an iterative process, but I think we as organizations have to be a lot more comfortable in, again, being open-minded and being willing to listen and learn about the market dynamics and the talent landscape and what's available and what's not, and being willing to make those trade-offs. So.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
Are you gonna run, Angela? Is that?
Unfortunately, I have to.
Okay.
Yes, but this was such an honor, and really look forward to hearing all the lessons learned that come following this. But it was a pleasure. Thank you so much again.
So the question about I'm going to summarize it this way: what's the future of HR? And Tania, you spoke about this a second ago. You know, I'll be a little tongue-in-cheek. HR is dead, but HR is being totally reinvented. We've spent about 100, 150 years organizing human resources around the idea of standard jobs, effectively in factories or on some sort of linear process lines, right? And the notion of a job, a static job, a standard job that you can do and grow in a linear way, I think is actually an outmoded concept. Right, so the opportunity now for HR, but it's not just HR, it's for everybody who's leading a business unit, is to say, if it's not the job anymore, what is it? Right, and it's a collection of skills, it's a collection of aspirations, it's how teams work, and it's how we actually get work done. So we're shifting the unit of analysis, if I can put it that way. And much of what HR has done, by the way, this is true in almost every functional division, the standard transaction compliance reporting processes that we do in every business function will be significantly automated, right? And significantly enhanced by AI to make predictions and Gen AI to actually write reports. So we're seeing the shift in HR from finding people for static jobs and building long pipelines to actually understanding the skills that we need in the future based on the work we're trying to do. How do we find people and not just recruit them, but access them in different ways? It may be as an employee, it may be as a freelancer, and how do we orchestrate them in different ways? So my hope is over the next 5 or 7 years, we're going to see, an outdated word, a renaissance in what we're doing in business, because we're going to be reinventing it around new problems with these new tools.
I don't have anything insightful to add. I'm just going to say that it's very costly to require very rare skills for an HR department. So they're going to learn. They're going to learn their lesson. And those who will not learn will be in creative destruction.
They'll be creatively destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Okay, so thank you so much. I mean, this was interesting to see how the environment kind of changes the workplace. I took away a positive note. I mean, it's exciting new ways that careers are happening, and because there is lifelong learning, those students are going to come back to Columbia to learn when they have to reskill again in a couple of years. So we see you back here in a couple of years. We see you back here in a couple of years. So thank you so much, Tania and Jeff, for this conversation. And thanks so much for spending the lunchtime with us, and have a good afternoon.